Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the Chair and Vice Chair of Harlow Council. Good evening, councillors. Please be seated. Can I have apologies for absence, please? Yes, Councillor Charles.
I have apologies, Chair, for Councillor Livings and Councillor Garnett.
Yes, Councillor Perry.
I have apologies from Councillor Shannon Johnson.
Yes, Councillor Perry.
Apologies for Councillor Churchill.
None.
Yes,
I have apologies for Councillor Lenny Shields and Councillor Tony Higgins.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No? Right. Council tax resolution, page 26. We will now go to the main vote. Councillor Inglis.
Yeah, I move it.
Right. Seconded.
Secondly, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Johnson. You got anything? No? We'll go to the main vote.
Call members in order, and you can vote for, against, or abstain. David Carter.
Against. I forgot to say,
Simon Carter.
Against. That's disgraceful. Well, they put it up on the
Councillor Davis.
Joel Charles.
Against.
Jean Clark.
For.
Yeah.
Four. Oh dear.
You can go now, Jean.
I didn't know what they were saying.
Mike Danvers.
Four, even though the Tories are actually putting it up by more than anybody else there.
Bob Davis.
For.
Joe Dunn.
For.
Tony Durkin.
Four.
Tony Hall. Michael Hardware.
Against.
Eugene Harvey.
Four.
Maggie Hall Coop.
Four.
Mark Ingle.
Four.
Shannon Jezard.
Four.
Andrew Johnson.
Against.
Katie Johnson.
Against.
Francis Mason.
Four.
Paul.
Me.
Sorry.
Stephen Mullard.
For.
Russell Perry. Danny Purton.
Four.
Clive Souter.
Abstain.
John Strachan.
Four.
Emma Toll.
Four.
Chris Vince.
For.
Phil Waite.
For.
Nancy Watson.
Four.
Mark Wilkinson.
Four.
That's 18 for, 8 against, 1 abstention. That's carried.
Thank you. Maximum business there are none. And the meeting is now finished at 7:35.
Thursday, the 27th of February 2020. I have one apology for absence, and that's Councillor Lumley Shears. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, let's move on to the minutes, pages 4 to 14. Are we happy to approve those as a true and accurate record of our last meeting? We agree that it's a true and accurate record? Thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes of our last meeting? Councillor Byrne.
Yes, Chair. Although obviously it's not in the minutes because they're sort of generic wild minutes, nevertheless, at the discussion on the general fund budget item at the last meeting, I did, in answer to a question, announce that we were deleting the green waste bag collection service in conjunction with improvements to the fortnightly wheelie bin collection. However, I'm pleased to announce tonight that following initial feedback from that decision, we will now in fact retain bookable green waste bag service while we roll out the new cheaper wheelie bin subscription service from the 1st of April. This is at no additional cost to the council. This green waste bag service will be reviewed at the mid-year point to evaluate the respective take-up of both the wheelie bin and the waste bag service before any longer-term decisions are taken. I can also announce that as from April this year, all green waste bag collections will be undertaken using fully compostable bags as part of the council's commitment to eliminate single-use plastics. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other matters arising from the minutes of the last meeting? Right, then let's move on to written questions from the public. Before I begin, I will point out that in this Cabinet meeting we usually allow 15 minutes for questions. We have a number of questions and I'm certain it's going to hear them all will take more than 15 minutes. But in the interests of openness and transparency, I intend to use my discretion to extend that 15 minutes so you can hear them all, and that's been made much easier by the questioners from the Harlow Alliance Party who said that they'll only ask one supplementary question in total, in mindfulness of the fact that we're going to get through quite a lot this meeting. So, first question, Mr. David Ford.
In response to the BBC's Panorama programme aired on 3rd February regarding the conversion of office blocks to temporary accommodation, much reaction has centred on ending permitted development rights to convert offices. Consequently, does the leader of the council agree, A, that a more fruitful discourse would be to formulate a national plan for large-scale investment in affordable and, in particular, social rented accommodation. B, that one solution is offered by the National Housing Federation in its report, Capital Grant Required to Meet Social Housing Need in England 2021 to 2031, which was published in June 2019, that details a viable financial model for building 137 and 59 affordable homes, of which 80,285 are social rented, this being each year for 10 years from 2021. This would require government capital grant funding of £12.8 billion per year at 2019/20 prices, producing an average grant funding rate of 44% of total scheme costs. And C, that the National Housing Federation are correct about the necessity of this scale of building and government investment when it says, quote, given the pressures facing the housing market, it is also the only route to reaching the government's target of building 300,000 homes per year, end quote.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for your question. The problems that have arisen from some of the office block conversions in Harlow have their roots in government policy. Since the introduction of universal credit, there's been a significant rise in homelessness, resulting in increased demand for temporary accommodation. The decision in 2016 to freeze the local housing allowance cap that limited the maximum rent a council could pay to the bottom third of the market in its area, at a time when rents were rising fast, has meant that many councils can no longer find any accommodation within their borders that they can legally afford to rent for those on housing benefits. Permitted development rights, agreed in 2013, allowing for the conversion of office blocks into residential accommodation without planning permission, has enabled private companies to cash in on the problems caused by universal credit and the local housing allowance cap freeze and provide accommodation that often falls short of decent space standards. The profits these companies make from housing benefit relies on a model of full occupancy, hence their less than scrupulous vetting of the mix of tenants they house. You're entirely right that a national plan for large-scale investment is the only long-term answer to solving the national housing crisis, and that the National Housing Federation solution makes some sense. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Last year there was an academic study about London council estates and their social cleansing and its everyday experience of cumulative dispossession. They concluded that for some, these dispossessions were brutal, alienating and discriminatory, and that supportive, familial and community networks were undermined and often destroyed. Therefore, what will Harlow Council do to support people behaving in an antisocial manner who may well have been traumatised by the displacement to our town?
Thank you. For some time, Harlow has adopted a multi-agency approach to help identify and support families through the transition period when they're moved into Harlow. The police work with the landlords, I know, and regularly meet with them. They support and deal with matters associated to do with antisocial behaviour. Harlow Council produced a leaflet that helps families and other households through that transition period. It signposts them towards services and facilities available and helps those new to the town to settle into the community. But the problem is, we are dealing with the issues that are arising from problematic office block conversions in Harlow. And what's really needed, in addition to what we can do with other agencies to deal with the effects of these problematic office block conversions, is government policy to be changed so that the problem doesn't occur in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Sheila Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take my question as read and the answer as read, but I do have a supplementary to save you time.
Thank you.
When I last looked this morning, there are 11 additional licensing properties on the HMO register. And I am concerned that if we stop protecting the town by adding to that register, we will be providing an attractive loophole for unscrupulous landlords to move in. I can see that's a big possibility, and it's happened in London boroughs as well. Your reply says that you will take watch on this issue, and I would be very grateful if you could do exactly that and take it very seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for a very relevant question. In response to the supplementary question, our information that is today is there are only 6 of these properties involved, but I am, however, happy to clarify that figure with the officers involved. The last paragraph of my answer to you clearly states that the council will keep this position under review in case circumstances change. At present, the small HMOs in this town do not cause the issues that the larger HMOs are causing. But, however, please be assured that if there's a change to that situation, this council will change its policy. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Mr. Nicholas Taylor.
Yes, good evening. The Harlow and Gilston Garden Town Plan will see hundreds of homes being built on greenbelt land to the west and southwest of Harlow, clearing away many acres of greenhouses used for food production. jeopardising the importance of the Lee Valley as a food production area. The Lee Valley Growers Association, formed in 1911, formally objected to the plans of Epping Forest District Council at the local plan examination. The Harlow Alliance Party are aware that a number of landowners of this land, some of whom have been in business there for many decades, do not want to sell their livelihoods and then have to try and find land which someone else might want to sell to be used for food production. Can you tell me why this Labour-controlled council are in favour of building on the green belt, the destruction of local businesses and jobs, and the loss of food production, threatening the importance of the Lee Valley as a centre of food production in this country?
Thank you for your questions, Mr Taylor. The sites referred to are located within Epping Forest District, and so are contained within Epping Forest District Council's local plan. The Lee Valley Growers Association should refer their concerns to Epping Forest District Council. However, Policy E3 of the Epping Forest District Council draft local plan specifically provides policies to promote and protect the glasshouse industry in the Lee Valley with an aim of increasing production by 20% in the local plan period. It should also be noted that the land within the Water Lane Master Plan area has been consistently promoted by the landowners for inclusion within the plan and for future residential-led development.
Thank you. My second question then is, in view of the response to my question last month, it is clear that come the end of the current local plan period in 2033, that despite Harlow Council's house building programme, it will have less homes than it did have in 2012. The plans of neighbouring authorities for new homes on Harlow's borders will not see any council-owned homes built. At best, a small number of the overall number of new builds may be owned by housing associations. Can you explain, therefore, how these plans help the thousands of families living locally, desperate for a council house, who will never be able to afford to buy even an affordable home?
Again, thank you for your question, Mr Taylor. In 2012, Harlow had a stock of 9,824 properties. In 2019, that stock had fallen to 9,180, a reduction of 644 properties over a 7-year period. The local plan provides for 10,620 new homes, with a policy being that 30% of these should be available as affordable housing, which more than makes up the deficit.
I've got a supplementary question then. Of those 10,620 homes, of which 30% will apparently be affordable, how many of them will be publicly owned rented properties?
At this stage, the precise number is too early to say, but we are committed to 30% of affordable housing.
That's not rented. Well, we'll come back next time with a further question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Alan Leverett.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. The outcome of the inspector's examination of Harlow Council's local plan will be known later this year. It is noted that the council produced a document of a couple of months ago which set out how it's going to engage with the residents in the future. Harlow Council will shortly now need to consult residents about the changes which the inspector finally makes to the local plan. Can you give specific examples of what residents can be expect from the difference as a result of the recent undertaking compared with the consultation carried out to the residents during the 4-year period that it took in consulting with the original local plan?
The latest phase of creating Harlow's local plan now provides certainty to local residents. Previous consultations over several years have focused on looking at options for growth locations. The conclusion of this process now fixes these, and so residents of Harlow will have certainty about which areas of the town will be available to be developed and which will not. In terms of what will be different in the local plan, the inspector has removed 7 sites from the list of sites allocated for housing development, and so these will now remain as green space. There are also a number of minor amendments to green belt boundaries in Harlow, and there is a new policy requiring developments to contribute to the health and well-being of the town.
Thank you. We've agreed not to ask supplementaries because of time tonight.
Thank you.
Second question. Councillors from both parties will be as well as Harlow residents, have expressed concerns about the plight of many of the residents uprooted from the area they live in by being placed in office conversions in Harlow, often miles away from the extended families and support network. The hope must be for the council will cease this practice, and I know you've been involved with this personally yourself. If this was ever the case, do you, or indeed the council, have any thoughts about what these office conversions will be used for in the future?
Well, the council doesn't own any of the buildings that have been converted to residential use in the way that you speak of, and so cannot control their future use unless community development rights are ended and they become subject to planning control. In the event that this does happen, it's hoped that some may be suited for conversion to better quality residential development, or that those in industrial areas can be reconverted back to employment use.
Thank you very much. We'll probably come back later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sue Liddemore.
Good evening. Many residents have expressed concerns that at the same time as Acacia House has remained empty for a considerable period, there are homeless families being placed in unsatisfactory accommodation and individuals are living on the street. Are you able to give an update on what is the future of this building, and has the council given any thought about purchasing it and converting it into family-sized homes for people on Harlow Council's housing register?
Thank you for that question, Mrs. Liddemore. Harlow Council is in discussion with the owners of the building regarding its future use, have been for some time. This dialogue is ongoing and for commercially sensitive reasons it's not possible to give more information on the progress of these discussions at this time.
The next question. The town's master plan of the 1940s envisaged that the town's hospital would be sited in the centre of town, giving easy, quick access to as many residents as possible. Over a decade later, this proposal has stood the test of time and the hospital was built as originally proposed. Early responses to a survey presently being carried out by the Harlow Alliance Party shows that 66% want the new hospital to be located on its present site. Can you advise me what is Harlow Council's preferred option, building a new hospital on the present site or near to the new junction 7A, some 3 miles from the present site?
Again, thank you for the question. Whilst there are many strong arguments to rebuild the hospital on its current site, there are also strong arguments for a new hospital to be built on a new site. Harlow Council, working together with the MP for Harlow, have taken the view that what matters is that Harlow has a new hospital. Ultimately, the location of the new hospital is a decision that will be made by Princess Alexandra Hospital Trust and the Department for Health.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Steve Dean.
Good evening. At last year's examination of Harlow Council's local plan, an officer of the council was asked about the consultation which the council had carried out with residents living near those sites being considered for building homes on them. The officer stated that the council had employed a business to do this. Responses then formed one element of the matrix used to determine whether the site should remain on the list. Having spoken to hundreds of residents living near these sites, members of the Harlow Alliance Party had yet to come across anyone who was approached on this subject. Can you tell me how many residents were consulted at each site, whether it be at the first stage when hundreds of sites were identified, the second stage when the number was less than 80, or the final stage for just 20 sites, and when this took place?
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Consultants LUC undertook an open spaces study which included the auditing of open spaces across the district. As part of this, public consultation was undertaken in a number of ways in order to try and reach a broad range of Harlow residents. 850 individuals were contacted to take part in a telephone interview. A letter was sent to 4,000 residents, local groups and stakeholders asking them to participate in the study by filling in a questionnaire. 2 workshops were undertaken for local residents and local groups, 2 focus groups were undertaken, focusing on underrepresented groups. A total of 356 responses were received from the questionnaire and telephone interviews, 118 phone calls and 238 questionnaires. In addition to this were detailed views of those individuals that attended the 2 workshop events and the 2 focus groups which targeted children and young people. In terms of the local plan, in addition to exhibitions, press notices, articles, website notices, notices in local libraries and the Civic Centre, the following numbers of people were sent notification letters, emails at each stage of the local plan production. A. Issues and options stage, approximately 1,800 contacts. B. Emerging strategy and further options stage, approximately 2,381 contacts. C. The development management policy stage, approximately 2,231 contacts. And D. The pre-submission publication stage, approximately 2,800 contacts. The contacts comprised consultees from the Council's database, including individuals who expressed an interest, environmental organisations, residents' associations and adjoining councils.
And my second question. Back in the 1990s, Harlow Council carried out work to a number of sites around the town to stop travellers from occupying council land. In view of the recent case involving Bromley Council, Harlow Council may find they are unable to get a further injunction against travellers setting up encampments in Harlow when the existing legal restriction expires in June of this year. Has the Council any plan in place to carry out physical works around the town to stop travellers from being able to gain access to sites which they have used before?
Again, thank you for that question. I'm sure we'll watch that judgment with interest. The procedure Bromley Council used to seek an injunction was very different to the procedure used by Harlow. Our advice is that Bromley's failure to secure an injunction does not make Harlow Council's plans to renew our successful injunction any the less likely. Work has already been carried out, however, to secure vulnerable parts of the town. Should further areas be deemed to be vulnerable, the Council will look at the possibility of protecting that piece of land. We ask members of the public to remain vigilant and to report any areas of concern regarding the vulnerability of land that they may have. Thank you. Mrs. Kimberly Dew.
For decades, Harlow Council had a repair and painting programme for the external fabric of its houses, effectively protecting its assets. Houses have not had such work carried out for at least 15 years, and many houses are now suffering defects and looking shabby as a result. When can the tenants of Harlow Council's houses next expect their homes to be repaired and painted externally?
Thank you. The Council has a programme simply called Painting, which is prioritised annually based on resources available, priorities and the condition of dwellings. These programmes include painting and associated repairs of both the external fabric of flat blocks and houses and the internal decoration of communal areas within flat blocks. A programme of external painting of estates and the Council website will be updated in May 2020.
The next question is, work to construct homes at Bushy Croft and the former Lister House site and Elm Hatch are due to commence later this year. Can you advise what sort of tenure these new homes will be?
Thank you. The new homes planned for Bushy Croft and Elm Hatch will all be council homes. We expect all these homes to be rented and offered to people from Harlow's housing register. Thank you.
And thank you to all of our residents for attending tonight and asking those questions. We will now move on. There are no written questions from councillors. There are no petitions. To the forward plan, pages 15 to 23. There's a note of the forward plan.
Great.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, it's a question we've asked before, but I'm wondering when the HDS business plan for housing and regeneration will appear. on the forward work plan. Given what the question and answer we've just heard about housing, I think it's appropriate that we actually see the work plan coming forward.
Councillor Johnson, I think you may have an early draft which doesn't include it. The draft that's available on the
copy that I was given tonight when I walked into the chamber.
Well, then there's questions to be asked.
I can assist. This was the forward plan that was produced a little while ago. This is the one that goes on this agenda. There's a new forward plan which came out to all members yesterday, and that actually has the H&R business plan on it.
Chair, can I follow that up then? Given that we have been told, we were all phoned urgently today to be told there are no access to our electronic devices, the council's websites are down, and we were told we would be provided with up-to-date printed copies. Why have we got printed copies that are then out of date? And how many other items in this agenda paper are out of date?
Our practice for many months, if not years, has been to produce a forward plan that was published earlier than the one that was published the day before the Cabinet meeting. When we published the agenda, that was the forward plan that existed. The other one was only printed off yesterday.
And if I say, Councillor Johnson, the important part of your question is when will be on the work plan. It's on the work plan and it will be reported at the next council meeting in March.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Cabinet meeting. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. I think all councillors were deeply concerned at the short closure of the William Martin Junior School. Now, why that has implications for the council's forward work plans, I think that all councillors in the Cabinet would appreciate an update to the council's contingency plan, which those who have been in administration have been privy to and understand how that functions. I would have expected at this meeting or at the next council meeting that the Cabinet would look at those contingency plans, because Essex County Council, in a proportionate way, has upped its preparedness to deal with the coronavirus. I think this is a matter for all councillors as we prepare for what could lie ahead. We need to be proportionate and measure that through the council's pre-existing contingency planning. So I would wonder if the Cabinet would think it appropriate to have an update to the contingency plans that the council has at the next Cabinet meeting.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Charles. As a father who has 3 children who go to William Martin School and who therefore received via email the news that the school would be shutting, with a wife who's one of the governors, perhaps know a little more about what's was behind the decision to close it. Nobody from, and I think it's important that we share this with the public, nobody from William Martin School, no member of staff has been confirmed as having coronavirus. One member of staff had returned from a holiday in an area where the coronavirus was unfortunately to be found, and the school took the entirely precautionary measure of closing the school just to disinfect it. And it really was a belt and braces approach to safety, which I applaud as a parent. As to whether we will be looking at contingency plans.
Can I assist again? We had management board obviously on Wednesday, I think this week. We had a lengthy discussion about coronavirus and our position and what we should be doing. Today there was a meeting which was chaired by Jane Greer and Simon Hill, cross-service, to deal with continuity planning, deal with reactions to staff, what should happen if. I'm quite happy once we've got a document to send it out to all members. It seems the appropriate way of dealing with it.
Councillor Charles.
And I'm grateful for that reply from both the Chair and the Chief Executive of the Council. I think our primary concern is not only the staff of the Council but the wider public, given that we have Public Health England co-located in effect in Harlow to offer advice to us, and the work that Essex County Council is actively doing, and Essex County Councillors are briefed on that. I think a coordinated approach, as you have rightly outlined, would be well received.
Right. Any other questions on the forward plan? I'm happy to note the forward plan. There have been 2 recent relevant decisions taken by the leader deputy of portfolio holders. There is one taken by the portfolio for Member for Housing on the 11th of February, details on page 24, and one taken by me on the 18th of February on page 25. Are we happy to take note, Councillor Armstrong?
Chair, in the pack that we provided on page 25, it says that the plan is laid out in Appendix A. I can't appear to find that in my Appendix A. Could you point me to which page it's on, please?
So it's Appendix A to the original report, which is on the website. I appreciate the time. I'm just seeing it on the website at the moment, but it isn't.
That's another thing, Chair, that's not in the pack that we've been provided tonight.
All I can do is apologise for that and guide you to the relevant documents on the website as soon as that's up and running again. Are we happy to note those decisions?
No.
Thank you. So now let's move on to item 10, which is the local development plan. Item 10, the local development plan modifications prior to consultation, which you will find on pages 26 to 272. Are you moving that?
Yes, Chair.
And I'll see it.
First of all, I apologise to colleagues and members on the length of this document, not necessarily because it's a formal document, it has to be produced in its entirety. This is another milestone in the process of us moving towards the adoption of a local development plan. This particular step is quite statutory in the sense that we're doing something we're required to do by the inspector. The inspector, after some delay due to events beyond his control, has only obviously recently sent us the main modifications that he put forward to our local development plan. They have been discussed in the local development plan panel, which is a cross-party panel. We went through all the modifications in the inspector's proposals, and they're now put forward to this cabinet for approval for us to go to formal public consultation, which is a process that's necessary. Following that, any comments that are received to that consultation, we would obviously need to forward that to the inspector. The report also asks to note the local development scheme, which is actually on page 123, Appendix E, which sets out the timetable, which you'll note suggests that hopefully we will be able to formally adopt the local development plan in July this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Just a fairly simple one, I hope. One of the issues arising is the requirements of the landlords of Epping Forest to ameliorate the impact that additional housing in Harlow will have on Epping Forest. And it is referenced in here somewhere. I'm just struggling to understand how we in Harlow can ameliorate the impact on the environment of Epping Forest and that will Broad.
Yes, Chair, it is hard to believe, but the way it happens is that the protectors of Epping Forest, and obviously they do a very, very valuable job in trying to maintain Epping Forest as it is intended to be, and Natural England who support them in a technical sense. In order to define the area that they consider in which development may affect the forest, they draw a circle. Unfortunately, a very small number of sites in the southern part of Harlow fell within that circle, and that's why we're included in this process, unfortunately, because even the inspector agreed that any possible effect, a development to the south on the southern fringes of Harlow district, any likely effect that was going to have on Epping Forest was minuscule, but nevertheless we fell within that circle, and therefore we've had to be subject to the process that is mainly being managed between Epping Forest District Council and the Epping Forest Conservators, as they're called. The effect is on the basis that more people within a certain radius of the forest will visit the forest, and therefore if we promote development which falls within that circle, then we have to ameliorate the effect that new people moving into that radius will have in travelling to or travelling through the forest. So you can get from that the rather minuscule effect that's likely to come from anybody moving into an estate on the southern fringes. But that's the reason why it's included.
Thank you, Councillor.
What amelioration can we actually do? That's what I don't understand.
Can I answer? As the inspectors pointed out, there are two issues that affect the impact on Hatfield Forest and Epping Forest: air quality and recreational use. The inspector has identified that development in Harlow has a negligible effect on the air quality of Epping Forest, so we are covered on that. The issue really is around the recreational impact. And as to your question, Councillor Carter, what will be expected, and it relates only to the strategic site to the east of Harlow, what will be expected in the master planning of that site is that the developers will be required to provide what is known as a suitable alternative natural green space in the planning jargon, i.e. they should create green space within the development that would be appropriate for example, dog walkers to use, so that people have a local alternative as opposed to driving to Hatfield Forest.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chick. I first of all thank Andrew Bramage for providing a briefing for Councillor Carter and I earlier this week around the modifications of the local plan. There was one question, Andrew, that I forgot to ask you. It's on the paper agenda 46, and it's a technical question. But as you can imagine, I take a great interest in the strategic housing site to the east of Harlow that encapsulates Old Harlow. And it's around the discussions around secondary school provision. And what is the latest update on that and those discussions? And how far has that gone in terms of the planning cycle and where we're envisaging planning going into up to 2033?
That will come out of the master planning work with the developers and promoters of the east of Harlow site, Miller Home. They've not yet produced the draft master plan, but there is still the provision in both our local plan and in the Epping Forest local plan for a new secondary school to be built as part of that development. The precise location of that is still to be determined. We've actually got a meeting with Miller Homes on the 19th of March, where we're taking forward that master planning conversation, looking at the timescale for that. I don't think they're expecting the commencement of the development of that site before 2024. So a school would probably be at some point beyond that.
Yeah.
Councillor Harlow.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly, a point of clarification: it's the conservators of Epping Forest, not the landlords or.
That's what I said.
Did you? Oh, sorry. On the local plan generally, it's pleasing that some of the green spaces have been removed, which is compliments to my colleagues in Old Harlow and Catherine Sanders for campaigning for that, and it's good that the inspector has withdrawn them. We now go to a consultation, statutory though it is. It still serves an important purpose to engage with residents in Harlow, something which the council has been somewhat poor at in the past. And I was quite interested to hear the answer to one question where you listed and detailed all of the contacts and the people who were contacted at the Reg 18 and Reg 19. Obviously, it wasn't a success because you only had, I think it was around 120 at Reg 18 and 71 at Reg 19. So my question is, have you reviewed the strategy for your engagement with the public for this next consultation?
We will be, in line with the statutory guidelines for consultation at this stage of the local plan process, be recontacting everybody that has been on the council's database for consultation. Given that we are now subject to the GDPR regulations, we are only able to contact those people who have specifically asked for their details to be retained by the council. And we will be writing out to each of those people next month to participate in the consultation process. The consultation process will also be widely advertised through the council's social media channels, in the local press, and through information boards here in the Civic Centre.
Councillor Perry?
I'll just follow on from Councillor Hardware was saying. The actual figures for the responses, obviously the consultation is in the form of objections, whether anybody's got objections. We don't receive, obviously we don't count people who may not have objections. But I find it a bit rich for Councillor Hardware to claim that he and his colleagues successfully made representations to remove these sites, when in fact they made no representations whatsoever, either in writing or in person. Only the Harlow Alliance Party made representations, so I don't think the colleagues here can claim any part in removing those sites from the local plan.
And I think the Harlow Alliance Party made it very clear that they were the only opposition to turn up for the inspection.
Yeah.
But let's move on with questions. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, the supplementary to Councillor Harlow said, in terms of reviewing your consultation process, you said under GDPR you can only contact the people that have responded to you. Does the council not have access to every voter's record in Harlow through the electoral register? And they therefore able to contact them? I didn't see how GDPR played a role in preventing us from expanding our consultation. Perhaps that's what.
I think as Mr. Ramage has already pointed out, GDPR would prevent us from using that data for that purpose because it wasn't collected for that reason.
Councillor Johnson, very patient, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question to the portfolio holder. Can I direct his attention, please, to modification MN23, policy page 6, figure 14.1, to be found on page 171 of our bundle. And whilst I welcome the change to include a greater number of 4-bedroom houses in the tenure, I wonder why the portfolio holder is recommending tonight that Cabinet accepts a document that totals 102% in this table.
I suspect that's a rounding error, but...
It's clearly not a rounding error, Chair, if you add them all together. The movement from 0.02% to 2% takes the total to 102 because there is no negative to offset the new positive.
Can I congratulate the Leader of the Opposition on obviously spending so much time finding out this particular figure. Obviously, we will correct it. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Can I ask where the 2% then will come from as a negative out of the other areas of tenure, please? Surely the portfolio holder knows that.
Yeah, of course, I study every one of the 300 pages.
You should do.
I do, but this will change after I did that.
Oh, Chair, can I know where it's coming from, the 2%?
I'm more than happy to get back. I suspect that some of the figures after the decimal points will reduce. I'll get back to you. Right, if there's, if that's all the questions, any comments? So, Councillor Carter, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. It's page 61 of the agenda, MM22 policy H5. I feel the inspector is being inconsistent and contrary in some of his suggestions or recommendations. This is in relation to adaptable homes. He says to ensure that new homes are both accessible and adaptable to meet the changing needs of occupants, all new dwellings should be at least building regs part M42 standard for accessible and adaptable homes, and so on and so forth. He then says elsewhere on on our agenda, page 63, when we're talking about self-build, major housing sites of greater than 50 dwellings must include provision of fully service plots. Are you with me? Good. He also then says on page 53 of our agenda, MM14, to do with sustainability. He says development will be supported where it exceeds the minimum standards required by building regs. The amount by which the standards should be exceeded is preferably at least 19%. So developers have an immediate cop-out not to build or construct adaptable homes, because they can turn around and claim, well, we must provide service plots for self-build, and we must provide installation 90% greater than the existing building rates. I've mentioned this before, through this process, that I'm afraid accessible homes are not a nice to have, but I need to have. I know there's nothing we can do about it here. I will be contacting the inspector when the consultation starts. But it just strikes you as one crass inconsistency and incompetence that he's prepared to forfeit homes for people who actually need them against other issues.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I think you're right to say that accessible homes are a need and want. But you're also right to say that those comments really need to be addressed to the inspector. I do understand what you're saying. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. I, of course, welcome the planning inspector's decision, particularly with regards to Jocelyn's. I know that councillors in Somers and Kingsmore and Great Pondon are also pleased with some of the aspects of what the planning inspector has said. Back in 2014, I did submit in writing to the consultation about the green parcels of land that would go forward as part of the local plan to 2033, a formal response to the local plan process. So I have a written record of opposing using Jocelyn's as a housing site. Jocelyn's Park itself is landlocked in between Jocelyn's and Broadway Avenue, and then borders basically a dual carriageway. So it's completely inaccessible. My argument moving forward, and I will have this out with the planning inspector through the formal channels, is that I disagree with him. I think that that parcel of land not only is a recreational space, it does form part of that green wedge that runs along the carriageway into the trees that then border that part of the land. And I'll be making that case along with my colleagues, Councillor Livings and Councillor Garnett. There are other aspects of this report and the modifications that do need this council, and it brings into sharp focus the technical aspects, the technical challenges and the long-term planning decisions that this council, irrespective of administrations in the next 10 years, 20 years, will have to address. And I thought it was very helpful that we had an up-to-date version of the sustainability appraisal. For me, there are a couple of aspects that concern me and will of course require long-term planning. I am someone who is on record as saying that I absolutely agree with the Princess Alexandra Hospital Board's decision to go with a preferred site to the northeast of Harlow, over in Old Harlow in my ward. I think that is, and I am on record of supporting the experts in these decisions. That has scope to broaden out into a medical campus that could address the health needs for this town, and of course as part of wider infrastructure planning, that is one of the most important elements of the local plan. I'm also very concerned about the note on social care provision, and I've had this discussion with Essex County councillors. In particular, I don't believe the assessment that is carried in the sustainability appraisal adequately takes into consideration our ageing population in the town, and the figure that is produced by Essex County Council for additional units of extra care accommodation I don't think is up to the mark, and I am having that conversation actively with our Essex County councillors and then the cabinet members at Essex County Council, and I think we need to look at that as we progress on in the years ahead. Clearly, as the town expands, we need to recognise, and it is noted on page 158, the challenges around household waste facilities, and of course the council will need to work with Essex County Council to consider the impact of a larger number of housing being developed in the town and how that will impact the capacity for waste collections. And again, that will bring a long-term challenge to the town, and that will need to be planned for in the years ahead. Overall, as you can imagine, as one of the ward councillors for Old Harlow, I wish that the planning inspector had said more about the strategic housing sites in the North East. I still believe that there are significant infrastructure challenges to overcome. I disagree with the housing numbers, and I am consistent in opposing that. I believe Harlow's future housing requirements could be met elsewhere in this strategic corridor, and I know that that is the view of my colleagues as well. But as this progresses, I think there are a number of challenges, but I do mark out I very much support Princess Alexandra and the work that they're doing around health provision, but we also need to look at the social care element of this as we move on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm too very pleased, like my colleague Councillor Joel Charles, that the inspector has decided to recommend a redesignation from the plan here for sites at the Fennels to be redesignated back to Greenbelt, and for the open space behind Kingsmoor Recreation Centre to be kept open as part of extensive public open space. My colleagues, Councillor Nick Church, have been very vocal on this. I've been very vocal on this, as has Councillor Clive Souter from my ward. We've raised it in this chamber countless times that we oppose, and the group opposes any development, except development to the south and west of Harlow, and we've raised that time and again. So I'm very pleased with this decision. We have also raised the fact time and again that the residents of Harlow were never consulted on where these proposed strategic housing sites were going. We've been told they've been consulted on the process, but not where the sites are going. And I think if that had been allowed to happen, some of these modifications would have happened sooner. So I'm very pleased that the inspectors decided to make these changes. And I think it's slightly unfair to say that we've not raised these issues before in this chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. And of course, as I look at you, I look at the incredulity on the faces of the Harlow Alliance Party, who pointed out in this chamber that not one of you attended the inspectors.
That's not true.
That's a total lie.
Just one of you did.
He did attend.
Oh, yes, he did.
Right, so let's move on to the more important stuff, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. And it is the important stuff. It's going forward. I'm worried. I was worried originally, as you know. We spoke at length over the last few years about the Regulation 19 consultation and whether that was the correct thing to do. Our worry about the Regulation 19 consultation was that it wouldn't allow people to properly express concern at the individual sites. Members of the public still did, and fortunately the planning inspector used his own judgment and powers to make the modifications. I'm still concerned that on one read-through of a very large document, and I only read it through once, Councillor Burton, I tend to try and read these things 2 or 3 times, I spotted a clear glaring error in one of the tables, and I wonder how many other errors are in here that I haven't managed to spot. So I am worried, but I'm also worried about how we consult on this going forward as a council. You may be the administration, but we as councillors all together, I think it is a duty on us to get this out to as many people as possible in the town. And make sure as many people do respond to the final consultation as possible. And in that aim, I would be willing to do anything to support the council to get that out. One of the things that I can offer is perhaps that cabinet members might feel minded to move the removal of the calling procedure. I'm keen to make sure that this gets before the members of the public as quickly as possible. Any potential call-in and the cooling off period may delay that going out to consultation. So from an opposition's point of view, I'd be willing to offer that if you wish to restrict the removal of calling from this item, which it does say may apply. Perhaps that might help the council get things out to the public once it's still fresh in their mind following the initial consultation.
Any other comments? Then I'm just going to answer one. Look, councils across country are having to produce their local plans. We are one of the first in Essex, or we will be one of the first in Essex, to have our local plan adopted. And I think we mustn't go beyond tonight's meeting without saying a big thank you to the huge amount of detailed work that has gone into producing hundreds and hundreds of pages of local plan. And we know that this hasn't been straightforward. Our neighbouring boroughs, Uttlesford, is essentially rejected, Edmonds has been delayed, and ours is, as I say, one of the first in Essex which is likely to be adopted. And what does that mean for Harlow? It means certainty. It means certainty in areas that will not be developed, and certainty in those areas that have the possibility of being developed. So thank you. At that point then, are we happy to accept recommendations A, B and C on page 26?
Great.
Thank you. So now we move on to item 11, the Town Centre Area Action Plan, finalisation of Regulation 19 and submission to Planning Inspector for examination under Regulation 22, which you will find on pages 273 to 278. Who moves that?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And this is another important step in the road of looking to the future of the town. And again, this has been considered in detail by the local development panel. And we're now at the stage where we're asking for approval to consultation under Regulation 19. Now, of course, again, this is, I apologise for the thickness of this document, but it's necessary because it's a very important part of work and it's a very detailed part of work. But if colleagues wanted to get to the heart of the proposals for the town centre, then I suggest they look firstly in section 4, which is on page 31, which is the visions and objectives. We set out the main parameters that the designers of this report have taken into account. The town centre, when it was originally planned by Sir Frederick Gibbard and his team, everything was there, everything was in its right place. It was
a unique and successful town centre. Unfortunately, over the years, it has been, bits of it have been ripped off for very good reasons, but nevertheless removed from its original plan, and the actual nature of what the town centre's for is changed as well. And I think I'm very optimistic that this town centre area action plan addresses all those problems, both in terms of spatial design and also in terms of what the town centre is going to be in the future, what it's going to offer a modern, growing Harlow and Gilston Garden town. And I hope we can move forward with the process so as quickly as we can get to adopt eventually the town centre area action plan as part of the overall local development plan, and that we can then use it as a guide as and when proposals come forward for redevelopment in the town centre, so that we're working to a good plan and a plan that guarantees success for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clerk.
Thank you, Chair. A question and an observation. I totally endorse and support everything that the Cabinet Member has said about the future of the town centre, because it is no longer just a shopping experience, but it's about leisure and pleasure. However, looking at the documentation, I've always been concerned that we have deliberately, or for whatever reasons, excluded Princess Alexandra site as part of the town centre. And from an economic point of view, the hospital is still our largest employer. It's quoted that we get 500,000 people visiting that site every year, many of them using the town centre and using public transport. Therefore, during the consultation, I hope there will be an opportunity for us to review that and to understand why it isn't included currently. On the second point in relation to that, we also on that site have Pond and Hall, and also historical Roman site. And again, as part of the council's drive and ambition around culture, again, I feel it would be useful to have that contained in that area. So I would welcome comments to find out what was the decision not to include that particular site. And my second one is an observation, is I was wondering if the Cabinet Member could indicate what implications or opportunities are there due to the future investment in the town centre, what would that have, what sort of impact would that have on neighbourhood centres, namely Bushfair, Old Harlow, Stowe and Stapletie, as just a few, because they are centres that are at the heart of our local community, and we need assurances that they will be invested in the same way that we will be investing in the town centre. Thank you very much.
Councillor Perk. Councillor Dirk.
Well, obviously the neighbourhood centres are part of the local development plan, and the whole issue of how we regenerate the existing estates and neighbourhood centres in the town is something that we've got to give great consideration to, so that not only is it right that we don't ignore the existing town when we're looking at all these wonderful new areas that are going to be created by the garden town, but it's what our residents deserve. The town, just like the town centre, has obviously become tired and needs to be developed for the future. Similarly, in our other areas, and we are looking at ways in which we can regenerate our housing estates, and obviously the neighbourhood centres are being regenerated slowly, piece by piece, because again, we don't actually own all of them. We can only cooperate with the private owners in redeveloping them. As far as the hospital is concerned, well, I think when we asked or
when we engaged the consultants to do the town centre area action plan, there was obviously some uncertainty about the hospital site, although it's quite right that Councillor Durkee points out that it's a very important in commercial and employment terms. I don't necessarily agree with him that it adds significantly to the town centre economy. There may be people who go to the town centre just because they visit the hospital. I'm not sure that is a large or significant factor in the economy of the town centre. But of course, once we become certain as to what's happening with the hospital site, whether the new hospital is going to be delivered or not, or whether it's going to be delivered on the existing site, or whether it's going to be delivered in Epping, because it's not in Old Harlow Ward, the site on the north-east of Harlow, it's actually in Epping, Forest District of Shearing. But as and when we are certain about the site, then obviously it becomes part of the local development plan for the development of 450 dwellings. Then it will be a significant part of the new town centre. So I accept the point that Councillor Durkin's made, but I think that we need to have some surety about what's happening to the site before we can consider it as a part of the regeneration of the town centre. Because, you know, if it's going to stay there, there's not going to be much regeneration as far as the town centre is concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Durkin. Councillor Harlow.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query. Obviously, this is a document set in stone, whereas our town centre is a movable feast. The government has allocated potential funds in the town fund and the future High Streets fund. I'm just wanting to check that the kind of parameters that are in this document are being included in the proposals for those funds and any other developments that are coming forward.
Yes, Councillor, I don't think there's any conflict at all. What the area action plan does is set out high-level planning policies that any new development would have to abide by. The opportunity areas that are identified in the area action plan are consistent with the emerging thinking, or the area action plan has led to the thinking about future high streets development big, and some of the outline projects that are being developed for that are entirely consistent with the opportunity areas as contained within the area action plan.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to explore with the portfolio holder section 5 of the report, which is on page 56 of the bundle I've got, particularly around promoting sustainable movement. And whilst I think all councillors around the chamber are in favour of promoting sustainable movement, and clearly this document lays out that sustainable development is embedded as part of the development of the town centre, I'm concerned, and I wonder if the portfolio holder is concerned, that we are being short-sighted in this. In section 5.78, the reduction of number of vehicles on the road, which seems an anti-car policy. Now, I know in 2014, when the timeline for this document starts, 6 years ago, cars were the evil that everyone hated, but I think within the next couple of years we're going to see cars that are much more environmentally friendly. We're going to see many more electric vehicles on the roads, and the issues raised here about reducing climate change, the reduction of CO2 and the reduction of N2O, I don't think will be an issue for those vehicles. So I wonder if the portfolio holder would agree we're being short-sighted in the document, and actually we should not just be looking at the reduction of the number of vehicles, but a change in vehicle use instead.
Well, I don't think we're being short-sighted, and I would point out that whatever the attitude towards cars years ago, I don't think that it's changed much. When you try and move it around the town now, or on the roads, any time between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening, you can see the effect that cars are having in mobility in this town. As regards electric vehicles, of course, just because they're electric doesn't make them invisible. They're still going to be congestion, whether there's fumes coming out or they're electric. We're still talking about congestion, and of course in the town centre, what's got to be accepted, which is part of the town centre area action plan, is there's going to be a lot more people living in the town centre who won't actually need to have a car to get to the town centre, because that's where they're going to live, and we need to make provision for them to be able to get to their place of work or to the station or anywhere else they want to go around the town without necessarily having to acquire a private vehicle. That's what sustainability is all about. Electric vehicles may be part of the equation, but they're certainly not the answer.
And if I can add to that, of course, electric vehicles still need parking spaces, and we have a chronic shortage of parking spaces across the entire town. And electricity is only clean if it's being generated in a clean and renewable fashion. If it's being generated by coal or oil-fired generators, then all we're doing is moving the pollution to another site. Any other questions? Any comments? Councillor Carter.
Thank you. On page 12, right? 276 refers to the vision. Paragraph 12, the AAP sets the vision for the town centre as C. The town centre will be accessible to all by public transport, sidewalk, on foot and by car. So I therefore await the production of the qualities impact assessment, which is to follow. Accessibility, as I keep on reminding you, is not just to do with how you get there and how you get about, but not just to do with how you get there, but how you get about once you're there. How will the visually handicapped manage? Will there be enough landmarks and clear ways for them to go and for their guide dogs to follow? Will all the town centre be wheelchair accessible? Will there be any steps up to the shops remaining? And this kind of thing. Unfortunately, the vision and the wording of the vision is, in this day and age, unacceptable. If you're going to talk about accessibility, it's accessibility for all, so not just how you get there, but how you move about. And again, through the local plan working group, it is an issue I've raised before, and sometimes I feel as though I'm banging my head against the wall.
Thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Perry?
Unusual for me to say, but I support Councillor Durkin's initial request to have Princess Alexandra Hospital included in any consultation, because they are a big stakeholder in the town. They do have very close proximity to the town, and any new hospital isn't expected to open until at least 2025. So unless we're thinking of delaying the development of the town centre until quite far into the future, it would seem churlish not to include them in any consultation.
Thank you. I'm sure Councillor appreciates it.
I'd just like to make a comment about the cars versus the alternatives. You will only get people out of their cars by offering them clean, affordable and time-related, safe, good experience travel. Good luck with that one.
And I absolutely agree with you, and it's a shame that buses have been deregulated and that slash bus services across this town will be moving exactly what you're suggesting we need. Thank you. Right, if there are no more comments. Oh, Councillor Johnson, sorry.
That's okay, Chair. Apologies. I don't want you to think that the detailed questions and queries that we have raised means we are against this scheme in any matter. I remember back on Harlow Renaissance Limited, sitting with Councillor Durkin there whilst John Spence chaired and I vice chaired that body. I remember again sitting with you on Harlow Renaissance Limited, Regeneration Limited, while we were talking about the same thing, and a number of, I mentioned at the councillors' briefing on this previously, a number of the items and themes running through this were clearly evident by the work that those two bodies had done, and indeed the timeline presented in this report from 2014 to get us through to 2020 just shows how long a period of time it takes. I wasn't being facetious about cars, and I wasn't just talking about congestion. I was talking about the output of them, and I agree with what the Chair said about the need for clean, decent energy, and that's something that I think we've all in this chamber signed up to. But I do think, as Councillor Carter has echoed, if you are going to design a system that gets people out of cars, it needs to actually work, and I would look forward to us working as a team in this town, with MP, with county councillors, with anyone, to try and make that a reality. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. We supported this in 2018, in January, when it came before the Chamber. We supported it previously when it came back before the local modifications. I think we do need to make sure that the consultation, as we discussed on the previous items on the agenda tonight, the consultation is fulsome and takes into account everything that the public have to say. But also, this doesn't become just a planner's dream, because very often you see these almighty dreams on paper, and then the reality is somewhat lacklustre. I don't think any of us around this chamber want that, or the public want that for this town. Overall, I'm supportive and I want to see it go forward. I look forward to a vibrant town centre. I do think we have raised some legitimate concerns, and it would be helpful to know that the administration were listening to them and that the officers involved were listening to them. We're not just whinging, we're making, I think, very valid points that the public would support. Overall, Chair, you have our support.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. You say you raise that issue of your detailed questioning and scrutiny pretty much every time we meet, and every time we meet I say to you, your detailed questions are always welcome and they're always listened to. So thank you again for that. If that's the last comment, let's move on, and do we accept recommendations A, B and C on page 273?
Great.
Thank you. And now we can move on to Article 12, Item 12, the town-wide HMO Article 4 direction, which is on page 279 to 285.
Thank you, Chair. This report concerns an issue that is of growing concern in the town. It's part of what is happening, not just accidentally, but because of the pressures on housing all over the country. And at the root of it all is that there's not enough housing. Whereas we used to, years ago, perhaps an HMO wasn't really referred to as an HMO. It's a place where somebody invited guests to stay at their houses as lodgers. There was typically a landlord or a landlady living in the house. Whereas we've moved now to these things being exploited commercially and sometimes completely outrageously. Of course, most HMOs are well managed and they provide a useful place for people to live who only want that or can only afford that type of opportunity. But we found that because of the restrictions of the permitted development, or if you like, the opposite of restrictions, the ability for people to do set up HMOs, there was very little power we had to have any sort of control over the situation. We've recently confirmed that in fact we do have powers, and these powers are contained in a set of covenants that very wisely applied to every property by the Harlow Development Corporation, and they require properties that were built for families to in fact remain as properties for single family dwellings and not to be used for commercial activities. Since we finally established that these powers were available to us late last year, we've already used them to deny HMOs to be provided in a number of circumstances where we didn't consider them appropriate. Those covenant powers apply to most of the properties that are likely to come forward for HMO conversions, because they apply to all the properties transferred to the council in 1978 under the Transfer of Housing and Related Assets. There were, of course, properties that were either pre-existing in town or built by the Development Corporation for sale, or in fact were sold prior to 78 by the Development Corporation themselves, who had their own right to buy scheme. I remember being offered the right to buy my small house in Meadow, which of course I declined because it was public housing as far as I was concerned. There are some exceptions to the properties that we're able to use these covenants on, and therefore it's also necessary for us to proceed with alternative powers, which are the one available to us that we intend to use, of which this report specifically refers to as an Article 4 direction, which colleagues will have heard a lot about Article 4 in the last year because we've used it on other occasions to do with community development for large-scale conversions of office bonds. We now have the power to restrict that permitted development, which again has enabled us to direct an application under permitted development in Pinnacles, able to instruct the applicant that in fact they now need planning permission. They're not going to get permitted development. However, we feel that if we proceeded to implement Article 4 directive immediately without giving 12 months notice, our legal advice is that anybody who was considering introducing an HMO, which otherwise they would have been able to do without this Article 4 direction, then they would be able to claim compensation from the council, and therefore we consider it necessary to give the 12 months notice, which avoids any possibility of any claims for compensation. I would say that although I know Sheila Sullivan, who's already asked a question tonight, I tribute to her efforts in regard to HMOs. She's been extremely helpful and quite powerful, I would say, in pushing this issue to the fore. I know Sheila considers that we should proceed immediately with the Article 4, but I would say that there probably is only a small number of properties that we can't use the covenant powers on that are likely to come forward, and we certainly need to avoid any claims of compensation to the council. So I don't think in the end it's going to make that any significant difference to the provision of HMOs in the 12 months. It will give us that extra power, possibly at the end. And the reports suggest that we will review the situation at the end of the 12 months notice to see whether we genuinely need to proceed with the Article 4 directive at that particular stage. So, those are the three recommendations, and I hope the Cabinet will be able to agree with them.
Councillor Robinson, are you seconding?
I'm formally seconding this, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Dunn.
Chair, thank you. I really welcome this because in many areas we as councillors get a lot of complaints. They really cause a lot of nuisance to many neighbours when people actually just...
Sorry, Jack, can I just clarify? Are we moving straight on to comment to that question?
No, we should be. I was expecting a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I haven't asked anything.
Right, no, we missed out the formal seconding. I was expecting a question. This is clearly coming on to a comment. We'll come back to Councillor Davis if you don't mind. Any questions? Councillor Davis.
Yes, thank you. Before my question, can I also welcome the opportunity? It's long overdue that we've managed to get to this particular part. But can we also remind ourselves, and I do welcome the comments made by the Cabinet member, that not all landlords are bad landlords. We actually have a lot of good landlords that really support their tenants. Multi-occupancy, and I agree with the Cabinet member, is vital to enable low-paid and hard-working people of our community to live and work locally and have choice. And I think we should never forget that even though we've got rogue landlords, we have good landlords and we should celebrate them.
Councillor Token, we are...
My question is, hang on, I did say the question was, but when I talk about landlords, the rogue ones are more interested in profit before people and costs over community. So my question is, what assurances can be given to the good landlords of Harlow about these proposed changes, and what will be the financial impact on them?
Thank you, Councillor.
Well, there isn't any direct financial impact of us applying these powers. The question is whether we consider it appropriate for any particular application for the setting up of an HMO to be permissible in a particular place. We also would obviously take into account the reputation and the history of any. In effect, landlords will understand the conditions that they will need to meet in order for them to be successful in an application for HMO. Obviously, if they've got existing HMO, well then until and as such the property changes hands, that licensing will be able to continue.
Sorry, can I just come back for a point of clarification? So are we saying that actually the licences will be free of charge and that landlords will not be charged for any services provided by the council to carry out this action?
They won't be charged when they put in an application, and if the application is approved, then obviously they will need a licence which they will pay the normal licence fee that's set out in the council conditions. There aren't any additional charges in this respect.
Thank you.
Councillor Harlow.
I apologise, I'm getting a bit confused. So you're looking for a blanket covenant enforcement across the whole town. So are you going to apply that to every HMO that currently exists, or are you going to be selective to those that are misbehaving? And also, you mentioned lodgers. Obviously, anybody taking a lodger will be a breach of the covenant. I presume they're going to be in some way excluded, or are they not?
Well, I think Councillor Hardware is trying to make a bit of mischief here. Obviously, what we're talking about is powers we've only recently confirmed that we have, and which we're only starting to apply. So, in effect, these powers, covenant powers, are being used for new applications. Existing, I've already, I thought I said that existing HMOs wouldn't be, nothing would change unless, of course, they're not fulfilling the terms of their licence. But existing HMOs will obviously carry on with the existing situation unless and until the property changes hands, in which case we will then regard it as a new application. As far as somebody taking in a lodger, well, I mean, this really is, that's why we need a code of conduct and a set of conditions, because this really is to address the issue where the person who owns the building doesn't actually live in the premises. They're just doing it as a profit-making enterprise. People who live in the HMO usually don't know each other, and they usually don't know the landlord either.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you, Councillor Pert. Councillor Harlow?
Just come back with a question, two points. That the covenant's been in existence for quite a long time in many of the properties. And a breach of covenant is a breach of covenant. Are you going to be selectively enforcing the covenant or not?
That's why we need a code of conduct, so that we're not in any way using the application of the covenant, the power of the application of the covenant in any way that can be construed as being, personal or any other consideration other than objective factors. So,
I think what's clear, Councillor Harlow, is that we recognise that well-run HMOs in the right place are an important part of the mix of housing that's available. Correct. This is designed to limit HMOs that are in the wrong place by virtue of the fact that there may be several side by side. The powers that we're using are meant to limit those which have been badly run. Well-run HMOs in the right place have nothing to fear.
My issue is that, and you probably already have legal advice on this, is that selectively applying a covenant.
Which is why we need a code of conduct so that so when and how it's applied is seen to be transparent and fair.
And when's that coming forward?
So the planning and the legal services team in the council have jointly produced a checklist of looking at the criteria by which a covenant could be released or varied. That's been subject to external legal advice through a barrister specialising in this field who has said that we would be legally compliant using that checklist. So that's what we'll now start to use. So to give you some assurance that there will be a robust process that is where we can ensure that every application is treated equally.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say to Sheila Sutherland, who has sat through many meetings with quiet dignity, who's also, like many councillors, a fellow leisure zone gym goer, thank you for what she has done. I think everyone here agrees that we need to address the abuse of HMOs. My question is associated with the legal advice, and again, Andrew Bramage was very kind to go through that with Councillor Carter and I earlier this week. But in terms of paragraphs 17, 18 and 19 on page 283, I think there are a number of elements around this and the mitigations, and I understand the way that this has been constructed over the 12-month period. What I would be grateful for, and I think all councillors would like to see sight of that barrister's legal advice where it is appropriate, but would the council, in terms of being belt and braces on this, because it's important to get this right, consider a 6-month review, taking into consideration any wider external factors that may play into this debate. And I know that we had that discussion, Andrew, earlier this week. I just think it's really important, and I know that other councils would agree, that we get belt and braces on this, we get the legals right, but I do want to see that barrister's advice in whatever appropriate form that may be.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd be happy to share that. But in relation to the issue about the 6-month review, we will be reviewing this throughout the next 12 months, but we have to, by law, have a 12-month period before we could implement this, because that would avoid the council being subject to potentially very sizable compensation claims. But it's something we will be reviewing throughout the year. It's also worth pointing out one of the modifications put in place by the local planning inspector in relation to HMOs is that the council is now required to conduct a review of the new HMO policy in the local plan within 2 years of the adoption of the plan. So that will be another measure by which we can identify whether that policy under Article 4 direction is working effectively, or whether it's too heavy-handed, or whether we need to make it stronger. But there'll be a further check on that in 2 years' time as well.
Yeah, I just add, well, first of all, I welcome the support of the opposition for the proposal. proposals in this report, but I would also suggest that 6 months is probably too early, because we are recruiting inspection staff for HMOs, and you know, it's going to take them some time to get their processes in proper order, and for us to get data back on what's, you know, really happening in places where we're receiving complaints from. So I think, although, you know, it's as well to, as Andrew has said, keep the matter under constant review, I think we can only come to some conclusion, you know, coincident with the 12 months notice that we're applying to the Article 4. So I think that's a much more straightforward point at which we can look at the whole, we can look at all the data we've gathered from the inspectorate, we can look at any objections to the notice. It's an appropriate point at which we will review our whole policy and decide how to go forward.
Any other questions?
Thank you. You know, we're looking at to page, you know, for the agenda. Maybe there are some elements I haven't quite grasped. From what the portfolio was saying earlier, it sounds as though existing HMO licence holders will not be affected by this until their licence expires or they dispose of the property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the good landlords we have at the moment have nothing to fear.
That's what we just said, yeah.
Excellent. That's what you said. Okay. We obviously all welcome some effective form of enforcement on HMOs. I mean, all of us have had complaints about properties, noise, parking, rubbish, everything else. It's clearly something needs to be done. And this is obviously part of the way forward. And as Councillor Durkin has already alluded to, HMOs provide a very useful service, certainly to streets to homes, but also to the council in providing temporary accommodation, short-term accommodation, cheap accommodation. Now, over time, if this policy is allowed to continue with the requirement that there should be one parking space per room, then HMOs will dry up, because there are very few properties in Harlow that can provide that degree of parking. Even all three-bedroom houses, it's going to be very difficult to provide. So I have to ask, really, whether the council, whether the portfolio holder, has actually given enough thought to the implications of such a requirement. As I say, you know, we need to do something, and this goes, you know, quite a long way to actually doing it. But I'm not sure that the parking issue is going to help maintain a supply of good, well-managed HMOs.
Yes, Chair, I'm afraid Councillor Carter is confusing the two things. There's the covenant powers, which relate to the requirement that was placed on all dwellings handed over to the council in 1978, that those properties can only be used for single-family occupancy and cannot be used for commercial use. There's also reference to the buildings not being erected in the garden. Well, obviously, the Development Corporation is very far-sighted, because I mean, none of what happens in other places now was happening then, but they obviously saw that it might. So the covenant process doesn't refer to parking, which is the powers we've got at the moment that we're starting to use now. The requirements for parking are part of the Article 4 directive, which we're giving 12 months notice for considering implementation. And I have to say that the requirement for parking, however suitable it might be in some places where there are severe parking problems, is one of the reasons why, in the end, we may decide that the Article 4 directive is too big a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Because if we adopt the Article 4 directive, we have to apply those conditions to every single property. And in effect, Councillor Carter's quite right. If we applied that policy, we would in effect be saying there couldn't possibly be any, unless you had a great big house which had its own grounds and could provide parking spaces. So that is one of the reasons, or that's one of the factors that we'll have to consider when we look to whether we're going to take on the Article 4 powers or not. But the covenant powers, which we use at the moment, don't refer to parking at all. And obviously when they were drawn up in the 60s, nobody had cars anyway. They had roller skates.
Right, any further questions?
Sorry, if I can just go back on that. Yes, clearly government control and the Alcohol Directive are two separate elements. But my question applies to both elements. If you're going to be using or enforcing the covenant control, you are going to be limiting the number of properties available for HMOs. Okay, the covenant only covers those properties which were transferred to the council originally and then subject to right to buy, so there'll be quite a lot of other properties around town which will not be covered by covenant control. So what controls will you be exercising on those?
Well, as I've already mentioned, yes, there are a significant number of properties that don't fall into the category of those properties that were transferred to the council in 1978. But in our experience, those properties are not the ones that are being converted into HMOs.
Really? Sorry. You haven't answered the question about the impact of the covenant control on
the covenant control, because it's a power that is unique to us. We have the benefit of the covenant control. If we consider that an application from an HMO is acceptable for whatever reasons, see it's in the right place, it's run by a suitable landlord, we can waive the covenant. Right. We can choose whether to enforce the covenant or not. The fact is the covenant gives us the power to enforce it or not enforce it. The fact is that up until recently, unfortunately, it hasn't been enforced. And people have been allowed to, if you like, get a licence from the council without covenant powers being used, when perhaps they may have been.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Carter and Councillor Pertham strayed slightly into the question I was going to ask, but I think it's important to ask. What reassurances can the portfolio holder give to property holders or tenants who have a property that postdates 1978, and I'm thinking Catherine's, Sumner's, Church Lane, Newhall, Gilden Way, who in a year's time the council is successfully, I hope, using the covenant control to stop bad landlords of HMOs in the areas that they can, but then decides, because of some of the issues that have been discussed tonight, to not go for the full Article 4 direction. What reassurances can Councillor Perkin give those residents in those areas that what's going to happen is not the bad landlords will move out of the covenant control areas and move into these new areas?
Well, it's a hypothetical situation.
It's a very probable hypothetical situation.
Which obviously will be taken into account when we do the review. What you're really asking me is what am I going to decide in 12 months' time? I can't tell you what we decide in 12 months' time. We'll see when we reach that point and you get the outcome of the review.
I think it's a very interesting point you make, and certainly be a part of the review.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, any statements? Are we happy to...
Could I just
sorry.
There's so much negativity about this. Danny has actually really worked hard to actually get this to the forefront. This is an outstanding issue for people of Harlow. The way it's actually being treated by the opposition. Anybody would think that, you know, the landlords are actually paramount in this. At the end of the day, this is a situation where unscrupulous landlords are even converting things like their own conservatories. In Penny, there's a house that's actually been converted. The living room has actually been divided up. There are 8 people, 8 separate dwellings in that one family house alone. The rubbish overflows outside the front garden. It's an absolute disgrace. It's just one of many that we could actually all detail. Danny's done an awful hard work on this, and there shouldn't be any prevarication about it. The way in which he's described it seems very straightforward to me. It's an attack on very bad landlords in this town. I know the opposition don't like history lessons, but 40 years ago, £4 billion, I don't know how much that would be in today's terms, was actually being provided by central government to local authorities for housing. Now there is nothing for housing. At the end of the day, that's the fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. If we're to get away from this situation, we need to get back to actually building decent housing, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. And that's the way forward, Chair. And actually saying that this policy is something that is difficult, okay, but I think it's the way forward, and I think Danny should be congratulated in the way in which he's actually determinedly pursued that. And I also, hats off to Sheila Sullivan from Morley Grove. Well, Morley Grove's actually been plagued with this for years, and at the end of the day, hopefully there's going to be some resolution to this. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Johnson, then Councillor.
Oh, quite glad to go first.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't want Councillor Daniels to think that we were not supportive of this at all. And I think the majority of members on this side of the chamber that have spoken have all indicated that they are supportive of this. We all recognise that there are some really dodgy HMOs out there. We all recognise that actually there's a very good section of HMOs and that it's a minority that spoils it for the majority. But that being said, there are bad landlords out there and there are bad HMOs out there that do need controlling. So as a number of members on my side have said in their questions, we do support any measures that will do that. I don't think, Chair, that the questions, as indeed you yourself have said, my question about the implementation of this is unreasonable, and I think that's why Councillor Charles was seeking a 6-monthly review. Given what the portfolio holder has said about that not being appropriate due to the incoming staff and the need to monitor this over the next 12 months, can I ask instead, Chair, that you consider a regular update to forthcoming Cabinet meetings on the process of this, given it is an area that affects all members of the town, and it's an area that is of interest, given clearly the amount of discussion that it's generated tonight.
Comments noted, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. In comments to some of the concerns raised by Councillor Johnson tonight regarding certain areas that are covered by this and certain areas that are not covered by this, I think it's timely to remind people about the comments made by Housing on page 285 of tonight's agenda, which clearly states the approach recommended supports the Council's broader strategy in raising standards in the private rented sector by both recognising the growing role of the private rented sector in tackling housing need, as well as enhancing the requirements to enforce poor standards where appropriate. Absolutely.
Right. Are we happy to accept recommendations A, B and C on page 279?
Yes.
Agreed.
Now we move on to item 13, the disposal of a mobility house and mobility house annex, page 286 to 289.
I move, Chair.
And I will second that.
I'll just make a few comments. Obviously, we know that mobility needed to find new premises, which we've been working with them for a while. But since that has moved on, that actually the business is no longer viable. They've actually ceased trading which is a shame. Mainly, I mean, the visits, most people are not using it now, they've actually got their own mobility scooters. I don't know if members are aware that Mobility, the charity, one of their biggest recipients now are people for mobility scooters. It far outstrips cars. So they've ceased trading as such, and what we've done is provided another space for them to store the equipment that's left until they can actually dispose of it as part of the winding up process. So it is great sadness that their business is no longer viable, people are just not using it, which is a real sadness. But so we now have the building left, which is the old toilets behind Market House, and obviously that was going to be incorporated in the plans of the Market House, and that's why we brought this cabinet to Cabinet's approval to dispose of it.
Thank you. Any questions? Comments?
Sorry, I think we should just go on record as a council to thank everybody who has been involved in mobility over the decades, because they made access available and affordable to vulnerable people who never would have had that opportunity to be part of the town centre. So it is sad we are where we are today, but it is actually a form of recognition of the massive contribution they've made to our community.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Are we happy to accept recommendations A, B and C on page 289?
Agreed.
Item 14, charging policy for pre-application advice. Who's moving that? And seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously quite straightforward, practical, advantageous to the council proposition, which is that we start charging for something that up until now we've done for nothing. Most councils do charge for additional planning services outside the normal application fees. And you could, I suppose the only criticism you could make of Harlow Council is that it's been a bit slow catching up. But nevertheless, we are where we are, and we're bringing forward this report tonight to institute our own charging policy. I don't think I'll need to go into the details, but I would like to refer to on page 293, paragraph 15, where it says that confirms that we would not be requiring householder pre-application inquiries to be subject to any fees, and that the last two lines we are deciding to concentrate on providing pre-application services for developments seeking commercial financial gain. In other words, this is mainly aimed at property developers who come along quite rightly because they get that other councils expect to have pre-application discussions. They are usually quite a positive experience and result in advantage on both sides. However, sometimes the developer decides not to proceed with the development, in which case we get no fees at all. So we decided that in order to avoid that situation where we might expend considerable time and effort and then not receive any fees, that we best charge for those pre-development discussions. So I'm recommending to Cabinet that we approve the introduction of the charging scheme in accordance with the schedule, and that we give authority to review the situation in the future and decide on the scale of fees for any mixed-use developments, which sometimes you get ones that actually are bits of both. So we have to decide how to apportion that out. Thank you, Chair.
I'm very mindful of time. Are there any questions?
Yes, and I had a very helpful discussion with Andrew Bramage, who welcomed the point I made with him in the meeting during the week with Councillor Carter again. I do have some concerns about this report as it is at the moment, but I very much hope that the Council might consider an amendment to this report that I know Andrew was very open to. It's in regard to paragraph 15 on charge exemptions. I've had a number of community groups and churches who've approached me in the past about seeking advice about planning. And I've always directed them because I've always known that Harlow is one of those unique councils that offers free pre-planning advice. And I think it is important that we enhance this report by adding in a clause that those who are seeking pre-planning advice for planning matters that add community value, that we add that in here as a protection to those voluntary community groups, churches and other organisations that are seeking pre-planning advice for community value. And I think that that would just enhance this report because actually I've had first-hand experience dealing with organisations that have then approached the council and found that service very valuable as they've gone through the planning process.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Yes, Chair. Well, I think it's helpful to suggest that that could be one of the factors that staff, when staff use their discretion in whether they apply these fees or not. There may be other community-based factors as well. It may be, the nature of the organisation that's asking for the advice. I think we need to, rather than try to start writing down things, which then can, we'll be asked to add other things or be challenged to who's going to make the decision. I think we need to leave that to the professionalism of the staff to take those things into account. But certainly I think it's worth us referring to Councillor Charles' qualification that that's one of the things the staff can take into account. I don't support having it written down.
But officers do have a discretion.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Jones.
I agree.
Sorry, Councillor Jones.
I have to say, I had a very. This is in order to help organisations that are adding community value, and I think this isn't politically loaded. I had a very good conversation with Andrew Bramage about this, who was open to this, and I don't think I'm misquoting you, Andrew, about this. I certainly think that Cabinet should consider, given the groups that use this service for community value, that we take that you as the Cabinet take that into consideration. And I'm not saying to rewrite this report now. I would hope that a discussion outside of this meeting could be had so that a form of words appropriate to this, not to hinder what the Council wants to do, but to enhance this for the betterment of those organisations that are here to do community value. To build a community hall, which the church that approached me was considering. I think this is worthy of a wider conversation outside of this room. I would hope that you would consider doing that.
Councillor Charles, we've heard what you've said and we will consider.
Sorry, Chair, but you know my view on this. I've got a lot of sympathy with this point. And if somehow paragraph 15 could actually be partly written into the recommendations, I would be far happier. I'm going to support it, but I would be far happier supporting it if, in fact, the essence, basically, of what John Charles has said could actually be reflected as well in the recommendations. I should be clear on this. I should declare an interest because, as a trustee in Gibbon Garden, I have in the past actually been to the offices to actually get such informal advice. And I think it is important for voluntary organisations to be able to do that from time to time.
Thank you, Councillor Flanders. As a hardware, I'm going to have to extend standing orders.
I'll try. First of all, I'll tell you that I support this because most other councils do charge for pre-app. So it's not something that's different to any place. I'm looking through the clauses. Number 13 which really talks about larger developments, which talks about excluding planning performance agreements, excluding design reviews, and then it says council's involvement in consultation. And I thought, well, are you going to charge for councils being involved? But obviously not, because councils are not involved at the pre-app stage, which, as a member of the planning committee, does cause us, cause me and others frustration, because the first time we learn about a larger project is at the committee, which gives us very short time to make a view. And I'm going to ask whether councils can be involved in pre-app for the larger projects, because other councils do it, and it makes the process run quite smoothly. Secondly, this council signed up to the Essex Developers Guide, which specifies in the first section that councillors should be involved at the earliest stage. And also the 2012 Localism Act places local councillors in the centre of the planning process.
In principle, absolutely, and there have been occasions where councillors have been involved in meetings with developers. I mean, I can think in the recent past the developers of Market House and also the Strawberry Style developments that have been discussions with some councillors. So absolutely, yes, that can be part of a pre-app process. The clarification in there was just to ensure that we weren't providing potential conflict with the Development Management Committee.
Right, with the proviso that outside of this room, we'll have another look at the wording on paragraph 15 to reflect the comments that Councillor Charlton said. Are we happy to accept, and Councillor Danvers, you're quite right, recommendations A, B and C on page 290?
Agreed.
Right. I'm going to propose that we extend standing orders and for another 10 minutes and try and get through this agenda. Maybe shorter, let's see, 10 minutes maximum. Item 15, pages 302, communications from committees, working groups, recommendations from the Religious Diversity Working Panel. Who's moving that?
I move that.
And I'll second it. Any questions?
I was just going to say, I know you all want to go home, but this is obviously Lainey's report and she's not here. But, you know, the subject is so important and the work is so good and it's satisfying to see something which we brought to this cabinet has actually come to fruition. We now have an action plan which is focusing on the cohesion of our religious groups and the celebration of their similarities, and it's a really, really positive forum. I understand where there's been very, very engaged discussions by representatives across the spectrum, and I just think it shouldn't be passed on because we all want to get home. I just think we should say it's a great achievement and well done, and you know, I'm sure there's no objection to it, but I don't think it should be waved through. So.
Okay, thank you for those words. Any questions? Any comments? So let's please, are we happy to accept recommendation A on page 302?
Agreed.
And we come finally then to minutes of the working panels, the Housing Standards Board, pages 307 to 310. Noted?
Noted.
Lovely, thank you. And I have no items of additional business.